Today is June 2nd, 2017, and I am interviewing Tony Huffman in Taylorville, Illinois. Tony is 49 years old, having been born on December 20th, 1967. My name is Sue Burkholder, and I will be the interviewer. And so for the recording, Tony, would you please state what conflict and what branch of service in which you served?
Was in the United States Navy during the Panama conflict.
All right, thank you. So let's start with just some early details about you. When and where were you born?
I was born in Kewanee, Illinois, obviously in December of '67, small little town. Your average quaint Illinois town.
Well, can you tell us who your parents were and their occupations?
Sure. My father's name was Ron Huffman. He was a mechanic all of his life. My mother, her name's Mary. She was a homemaker her entire life.
And did you have siblings?
Yes, I have three brothers, one younger, two older. Youngest brother is 6 years younger than I am, and my two elder brothers, one is 20 months older than I am and 6 years elder than the last.
Okay. And what are their names?
Youngest brother's name is David, and then I have Jeff and Mike.
Okay. All right. And did any of your other family members serve in the military?
Yes, my father was in the Navy. My elder brother Mike was in the Navy, and the two others no.
Okay. Well, what were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I was in high school. After finishing high school, did odd jobs, worked at a couple of fast food restaurants. Of course, I was on the delayed entry program, and once my delayed entry was over with, I went into the service.
So you signed up while you were in high school?
Oh yes.
Okay. All right. And let's see, you said you were in the Navy. And why did you choose that specific branch?
Well, to be honest with you, my elder brother Jeff and I were going to go in at the same time on the buddy program. They actually they were interested in him because of his academics, and I was just basically tagging along. But at the last minute, he decided not to go in, but I still went in. So it worked out. Obviously, he didn't go.
Yeah. Well, so you've signed up and you're heading to basic training. What were your first impressions when you arrived?
Oh, I can remember that day just like it was yesterday. Went to basic training at Great Lakes Naval Training Center. We got off the bus. It was about 15 degrees, very cold, a lot of movement, a lot of chaos. Of course, it was basic training, so they're trying to get us, they're shuffling us all around. It was an eye-opener. It was a long day. I remember having that feeling of, oh, this is the first part of the process. But it was an eye-opener. A lot of hustle, a lot of bustle, and it was. I thought to myself, wow, what did I get myself into? It was different.
When you were going through basic training, did that make you question everything that you knew before you joined? Did it change your thinking?
Yes and no. Like I said, my father had served, my elder brother had served, so I heard the stories. But it's one of those things to where until you live it, you don't know. My first week of basic training, I thought, what did I get myself into? This is crazy. These people are running around, you're yelling at everybody. You get 30 seconds to eat. It was, first week I definitely questioned what was going on and did I make the right choice? It was...
Well, what about the instructors? I'm sure they were memorable. And what were they like, and is there anyone that stands out to you?
Well, we had, when I was in basic training, we had company commanders. And we had two company commanders, and I can remember their names. I'll never forget them. One was the signalman first class. His name was Lancaster. He was we called him the good cop. He was trying to be everybody's buddy, but still yelling at you and trying to direct you. And then we had the radioman second class. His name was Ott. And he was the hard guy. He was the one that laid down the punishment, so to speak. So they were a good combination. We did a lot of push-ups if we did something wrong. However, they didn't let anybody mess with their guys, their company. So it was definitely, there were times when we didn't like them, but there were times when we did like them. But overall, we respected them because of the job that they were doing.
Can you recall any, like if you could pick out one event that happened during basic training, perhaps a funny one or something that really changed your thinking and maybe shaped the rest of the way, what you did during basic, what would that be?
Well, one of the things that stood out is that I can remember the most, we had all of these different companies that were competing going through basic training. So every time that you competed in an event, for example, marching, if you did the best, you got a certain flag. So we were all trying to get the flags that signified that we were the best. We did have one company that was what they called the triple threat company. They were the rifle company. Those were the guys that performed at graduations. They always looked sharp. And so as we're marching past, being week one of basic training, you can look over and you can see that here's the old triple threat group and they're practicing and they just look really sharp. And it's like, you know what? I want to do that. I want to be like that. For me, that was the first thing that clicked. How meticulous they were, and I'm meticulous by nature, so it was very intriguing to me. So I can always remember that, and seeing them come into graduation and do their routine. It was really cool.
So let's say you're at the end of basic training and you're ready to go on. What advanced training, if any, did you go to?
When I got out of basic training, I stayed right there at Great Lakes and did what they call an apprenticeship training. Basically, what I did was, as I went from there, we had 8 weeks of training, basically teaching us how to be a deck seaman, because I went right out to the fleet after that. So everything that we learned there directly applied to when I got to the ship. Definitely went to a seagoing vessel. We were gone all the time. So it was good. It was the training that I needed at that time.
And how did you adapt to that, being on a vessel, which I understand is so much different from being on land and in barracks and that. So how did you adapt to the confinement of a ship?
I got to tell you, I didn't have any problems with it. I enjoyed it. Of course, I do well with structure. There were times when you felt like you were claustrophobic and you couldn't get away from anybody. The berthing unit that I slept in, we had 100 men in that berthing, and the racks were stacked 3 tall, and it got tight from time to time. But overall, concerning being seasick or any of that, it never affected me. We were a tight-knit group, and you definitely learn how to live with people like that.
What was your duty on the ship?
Well, when I first got to the ship I was on, I was just a plain deck seaman. So they put me into 3rd Division, which was deck division, but our specialized division were the small boats. We had Liberty boats on board the ship. We had our captain's gig that specifically hauled our captain around, and a couple of other utility boats. So our division took care of those boats. Well, as an E1 going in there, of course, I got to do a lot of cleaning on them and a lot of maintenance. And so as I got a little more rank and a little more seniority, I wanted to drive the boats. Well, I stayed on them long enough, and so they finally sent me to school to learn how to drive them. And that was my passion. So if it's on water and it's a boat, I can drive it. Even the ship that I was on, of course we had our watches, and part of our watch was steering the ship. Sounds easy. You gotta be with it because you're steering off a compass. But I really enjoy the boats, being out to sea. Maybe one day I'll get to do it again. Go out on a boat, that is.
All right. So what did you do in your downtime when you had free time?
Well, being that young, we spent a lot of time watching movies. We had a cruise mess, and we watched movies, and we played cards, and there were other things that we had to do, other qualifications that we had to attain while we were on the ship. One of the biggest things that I did, you had to learn all of the systems on the ship to get what they call enlisted surface warfare qualified. Well, I did that, and it took a year. So you have to go to every department in the ship and have a working knowledge of what they're doing. So that was, for the first year, that's what I did. And of course, I did correspondence courses to the University of Arizona, trying to attain a degree. I wanted to better myself. So I always stayed busy. It wasn't hard to do. I wasn't one of those guys that wanted to sleep all the time.
Where was your ship stationed, or where did it go? What were your orders for the ship and for you?
Well, I was on the USS Sacramento, an ammunition oiler. We were home ported out of Bremerton, Washington, at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Like I said, we were a supply ship, a floating gas tank, if you will. We had the capacity to carry 14,900,000 gallons of jet fuel and diesel fuel. So our primary function was we were the floating gas station for the battle group that we were in, along with delivering ordnance, dry stores, food, and also fuel. So we were a very busy ship. So concerning my duties, the division that I was in, we were what we call an underway replenishment detail. So we had different groups in our division that manned those stations, and we would actually fuel the ships. And there's a process that goes through with that, but that's what we did in our division when we weren't running the small boats. Always busy. Usually when we were doing a battle group, it would take anywhere from 12 hours to 48 hours to fuel and service the entire group, just depending on how it went. But it was a pretty awesome sight to see.
And how did that all happen?
Well, if you can imagine a ship, the ship that I was on, 512 feet long, 178 foot wide. And if you can imagine 3 stanchions, the tail end of the ship, the middle of the ship, and close to the front of the ship, that had moving heads, and these heads would come down. We'd shoot a line over to the other ship. They'd come up next to us, and they'd have a group of guys on the other ship. They'd pull a line over, and that line would turn into a rope, and the rope would turn into a steel cable. That steel cable, they would connect it with a cleat to their end. They would put tension on that line. They would raise that head up, and of course on that head there are an 8-inch high-pressure hose that was hooked up with a male nozzle. It would slide down on a set of trolleys into the receiver end on their ship, and that would pump, and they start pumping the fuel, and it would go into their tanks. So we had the capacity to do 2 ships at one time, one on each side, port and starboard side. Along with that, while all this is going on, these other heads that are going up and down, they can send over dry stores, food, dry products, along with our helicopter that was on board that was vertically replenishing the ship next to it or wherever it was going. So it was always very busy, very dangerous. You know, sometimes we might have a pitch and roll out to sea, might have seas that up to 30 degrees. I mean, that's a lot of danger, because of those cables. They can snap, they can hurt you, kill someone. So everybody had to be on their toes. Gives you a different kind of outlook and respect for the officers that were in charge and the responsibility that they had. Even at our little station, we had a lot of responsibility. So, excuse me. But I can recall doing that just like it was yesterday. It was 30 years ago. So it was hard work. We never lost anybody. No one ever got seriously injured, and everybody was very professional. We all worked together well.
And what were you in conflict at this time when you were having those duties?
Most of the time, I say that I was in during the Panama conflict because it was in that time frame. We did a lot of just normal evolutions, staying busy. Like I said, whenever the battle group that I was with was the USS Enterprise battle group. That was our lead ship. That was the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier usually carried the admiral on board. The admiral, of course, was in charge of that battle group. So whatever we were doing, whatever rotation we were going on, whether it be a Western Pacific cruise, a Med cruise, being out in the Mediterranean or Indian Ocean, we spent a lot of time out there. Just staying ready, you know, in case. I was in from 86 to 90, so the Cold War was still going on. There was a lot of, we were always on standby, always ready. But that's what we did. You know, did I ever see any actual combat? No. Well, like I said, that's why I say during the Panama conflict, because we were actually floating around during that time around that area. But that's what we were supposed to do. We supply we give them the ride and supply the fuel and the food.
Let's see. Were you injured at all during your time in the Navy?
Nope, never received any combat injuries or any injury whatsoever. Like I said, we were always very conscientious of what we were doing, and of course, I always made sure that. I mean, I never wanted to get hurt or maimed, so always paid close attention to what I was doing.
Yeah. Did you receive any medals or citations?
The command that I was on, we received a meritorious unit citation as a whole for the job that we did, because we were always our level of excellence was always so high. And if you ever look at a ship, I don't know what they're doing now, but if you ever look at a ship during that era, up on the bridge of the ship, you can see different things that are painted on. And if you notice, if you ever see the letter E on there, that's the meritorious unit of excellence. And if you see hash marks under it, that's how many times they've gotten it. Well, we had several. That's about all as far as the medals or ribbons or whatever. Of course, I missed the Good Conduct Medal because I didn't have enough time in. Because in the Navy, it's every 4 years. Well, I didn't have 4 years from basic training, so just missed it.
What kind of friendships did you form, and were any of those lasting?
You know, that's interesting. I made quite a few friendships, actually, from guys from all over in all walks of life. Being from a very small town, once I got out into the big world, I never had a chance to be around certain ethnicities, certain groups. So I was always fascinated with the different cultures. And so I had friends, like I said, from all over, from all over the world. We had guys that served that were from the Philippines, from Russia, from Korea, just different places. I stayed in contact with about 10 of these guys for 20 years. But as they, you lose touch with some of these guys. But for a long time, stayed in touch with a lot of them.
And did those, how valuable were those friendships while you were serving?
Well, they were priceless because these are guys that I worked with every day. They watched my back, I watched theirs. Like I said, it was a very dangerous job we were doing. That's why they call it the armed forces. We're out there, we're putting it on the line every day. Even if we're just refueling a ship, you make one mistake, somebody could lose a leg or get killed or get pulled over the side of the ship. So it was very important, to have those good relationships. I joked around with several guys that I worked with. I said, you know what, you guys you're basically just like brothers to me, because we fight and argue just like I would with my brothers, but at the end of the day, we're still good,
Let's see. Did you have any kind of a special, like a memento or something that you did just possibly like for good luck, or just to keep you, just something that, just to ground you?
Well, that's interesting. Like I started to tell you earlier, the division I was in, we ran the small boats. I actually became our commanding officer's driver, both in port and out to sea. So the first day that I took over on his personal boat, the captain's gig, he come down there, and old Captain Dvornik was his name. He was a second generation Russian immigrant, 7 foot tall, biggest man I've ever stood next to. He was a Mustang, he was prior enlisted, made it all the way to captain, which, the Army would be a full bird colonel. He come walking down in there, and he was a man of few words, and he said, listen, don't wreck the boat. He said, keep this in your pocket for good luck. And he gave me a rabbit's foot. And I carried that the entire time I was in, always. And I always had good luck with it. But that was the token that I carried. I can remember the day he gave it to me. It was like, wow, this is really cool. I'm an 18-year-old kid, and he's 2.5 foot taller than I am, roughly. So it was pretty good. But he and I developed a good working relationship. Everywhere we went, I drove him. So it was pretty neat. I got lucky.
Well, I would imagine you have to have a certain level of trust from a commanding officer to allow them to continue to drive their boat or that type of thing. So is that it sounds like that's what happened with you.
Oh, absolutely. He was the type of the man that, like I said, he didn't say much, but he knew that I was the guy that I would at least, if I'm going to do a task, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And he saw that. And he, believe me, he expected that.
Let's see, what was your main form of contact with your family and friends?
Well, when we were out to sea, obviously, it was by mail. Primarily, I would say by mail, because we were gone a lot. The ombudsman program for our spouses, they would send videos of our families. Of course, there was no Skyping back then. This is back before cell phones. So primarily it was them sending us messages. We would send them recorded messages, but primarily by mail. And in the battle group that I was in, of course, our ship is a supply ship. All the mail comes to us first. So we got our mail, and it was a big deal, of course. but that was the advantage of being on a supply ship. So primarily it was about the mail.
And how did that, how did that make you feel, being able to stay in contact? Or what did it mean to you, is how I want to say that.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be married to a wonderful gal. I usually, when I would get mail, I would get 15 to 20 letters at a time, because that's how the fleet post office worked. You know, they get it all together and then they have to send it out. So it always made me feel really good. We had guys that didn't receive any mail, and I'd always try to share bits of my mail with them. Hey, you know, the weather's doing this over there right now, and when you walk out, I was living in base housing. You walk out, and of course, in Bremerton, you had Mount Rainier, and my wife used to tell me, you know, Mount Rainier is so close, looks like you can reach out and touch it. So I would share those tidbits with some of the guys, you know, try to lift their morale as well, because we had all walks, you know, of life.
Is there anything else about your service as you were on the ship that we haven't talked about that you can tell us about?
Well, one of the coolest things for me, like I said, they actually sent me to school to learn how to drive these boats, the small boats, and whether it be a single propeller, which we called the single screw, or the double propeller, the double screw, how to maneuver them, how to tie up to a pier, how to approach a pier. So for me, when I went to school, I went to Treasure Island for 4 months to learn how to do it. It was a really big deal because they only selected one guy out of each division. So I was the guy in our division. Of course, they expected a lot out of me because this is our division. You know, you got to make us look good. And of course, when you're out to sea, and they got the gangway dropped on the side of the ship, and the ship's rolling, and they lower the boat off the gravity davit, and you're in charge of it, and you put that down in there. Of course, it's very important, and you got to know what you're doing, otherwise you can damage yourself, the boat, everything. So it was also very important because the ship that I was on, we carried a lot of nuclear ordnance on there, and a lot of these countries that we were going into. Greenpeace was really prevalent in a lot of these countries, and they didn't want us tying up or mooring to a pier. So we anchored out a lot. Well, when it's time for Liberty, our division ran the Liberty boats. So it's very important to keep the boats running, to maneuver them properly, to know the custom of getting in and out of a boat or out of a small boat. For example, part of our tradition is when guys are getting into the boat, you go from the junior enlisted, they get in first, and vice versa when they're getting out. And if a ranking commissioned officer gets in, if he's the ranking member of that boat, he's actually the boat officer. So you have to be able to determine these things and think on your feet. But it was always a good sense of pride for me, and to give me a feeling of freedom to get away from the ship and run these Liberty boats or drive the captain around in his speedboat. It was a good feeling of pride, you know, and especially when we're going into, we spent a lot of time over around the Philippines. When they'd see our small boats coming, of course, the first thing they're looking at is the flag and our colors. And they see the American flag and they automatically, you know, they were clapping or waving, or some saluted. So it was kind of a nice feeling. It was a good feeling of pride, and I remember those days.
Very cool. So you're, say you're getting to the end of your service and your time in. How did your transition from ending your military service back into civilian life? How did that happen?
You know, for me it was twofold. Being 21, about to turn 22 years old. I wanted to stay in. I should have stayed in. I missed the military. But once I made the decision to get out, the transition was a little rocky. I wanted to stay in Washington State. It didn't work out, so I came back to Illinois. I wish I would have stayed out west. Overall, it was okay once I made the transition, but I do regret not staying in. I do.
Okay. So, were you able to go into a career of some type, or what did you do for the first, say, 6 months or year out of the military?
Well, fell right into the family business, so to speak. My dad owned and operated his own semi trucks for a long time. So it was an easy transition for me. You know, I'm like my dad, I can drive anything. So I drove a truck for almost 30 years. Am I going to do that when I get out? I can. It's always something to fall back on. But it falls along the same lines of having that freedom. I don't like to, I'm not a guy that wants to work in a factory. I may have to when I get out, but there's no better feeling than to be out there on your own and be free.
All right. So how do you feel just overall, how did your military service and experiences affect your life?
Well, being 17 years of age and joining the military, for me, it gave me a lot of structure. It taught me a lot of discipline because I didn't have those things growing up. I wanted those things. So for me, it was definitely a life-changing experience because it gave me the tools that I needed to fall back on. I didn't always follow that, but for the most part, I always have those and I can always refer to those.
And when you look back at your service, has it changed your thinking or improved or in any way about the military in general?
It's never really changed how I feel about the military. We have the strongest and the best military in the world. There's a lot of pride involved in that. I enjoy saying that, you know what, I served in the military, especially the United States Navy, because I always enjoyed the ships. I have no regrets, and it's always a great sense of pride to say those things.
Is there any message that you would like to leave for future generations who might view or hear your interview?
That's interesting. One thing I can tell them is the military is always a great place to start, especially if you're looking for direction, if you're looking for that discipline and that structure. It's always good to serve your country because we have a lot of interest in this country we're trying to protect, including ourselves. And there's a price to pay for freedom. So to tell the future generations, hey, listen, you enjoy your freedom, thank a vet.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time just to talk with me and just share your experiences, and thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.